Hi guys! Okay, jumping in today. The conversation we're having is about the idea of self-love. And we talked about self-love, I believe, in some type of shape or form. If not, baby, I love myself. I think it is one of the best topics to start off with because I think it is a foundation to a lot of conversations about like becoming a better person or whatever the internet calls it specifically. Every day there's a new word for how to be better and cooler and more productive. So let's get started. Hi, it's your girl Jamila, and this is Hardship with D's. If you are listening, I hope you find your answers and feel like this is a convo with me. Okay, self-love. I was listening to a podcast, and the podcast is called The Self-Work Podcast with Dino, and the episode is Why Self-Love Feels So Hard for Some People. So if you want to go listen to that episode and also listen to mine, you can. It's not needed. I think we have two different thought processes, but I do enjoy how he thinks about some of the things. So we're going to kind of start off in the same way he did and talk about this concept of self-love. First question I like to ask myself, who is love yourself actually written for? And he specifically makes this beautiful argument about self-love being focused on this idea that people start at a neutral. When it comes to themselves, their self-image, self-view is neutral, is what is assumed. And then when people are told to self-love, it's like, oh, remember yourself too. And it's like you can love yourself even more. He also talks about how like as a society, we really push, you have to self-love yourself before you do anything else inside the world. But he brings up a really good point about self-love. There are other people. There are people who sit in a negative. There are people who don't start off with self-love. They don't look at themselves neutral. They hate themselves. They start from a self-hate. And how can you like introduce concepts of self-love to someone who hates themselves? And that's where I really want to focus on with this episode. The second season and our biggest thing is about building. This idea of building yourself up is about embodying yourself, especially in the presence of others. So when it comes to self-love, that's such an identity thing. I talked about it in essence a lot inside of the first season. And I think like if you ask me right now, do I love myself? Of course that. But I also know I did come from a point in my life did really have like self-loathing realistically, and it doesn't mean that like every single aspects of myself I hated per se. It's more there are certain aspects that I did not like, that I was shameful about, that I would not respect in any type of way. And sometimes that like perspective or that focus really dragged me down. When I wanted to address those things, I think I came from this idea of like positivity. And we talk a lot about this in the Woe Is Me episode. When there is some focus on a certain part of yourself, that really can derail you from like loving every other aspect. This idea of our emotional baseline, neutral, is not the truth for many people. And I was one of those people. And so I kind of talk about that and like work through when can self-loathe kind of change. I went from having like real neutrality, maybe loving certain parts, but then being like highly critical, almost to the point of like berating myself about certain aspects, critical on myself. I just want to talk about like this idea without like some real here's how you fix it or anything of that nature, because that podcast really inspired a lot of this episode, but like there's a lot of things I don't agree with. When it came to like his thought process, I'm like, that's not how I did it, which doesn't mean either of us are right. Starting from self-hate, where does that come from? If someone hates themselves and you tell them to love themselves, they're going to think about the positive aspects of themselves and kind of push down the negative. And it becomes this idea of like fixing yourself. People talk about it all the time. Like if you want to love yourself, you should gain confidence. You should do things. I truly believe that's super difficult for someone, because if you are not happy with how you look in the mirror, I think a lot of young women like have that thing, whether that's weight, your makeup, whatever it is, you can sit here all day and long and say like, well, I love myself except for X, Y, and Z. Because that's like the best I felt like I could get for a very long time. I loved most of myself, but there's certain parts that I was like, yeah, but X, Y, and Z could be better. And that's like me saying that nicely out loud. It was mostly like internally like, hell nah. Comparison is the thief of joy. I believe that's the quote. When you looked at yourself, when you looked at the hatred that you had for yourself, sometimes it came from like this comparison and then this goalpost that you push for yourself. And it might be like this specific person. It might be like, oh, if I was like 10 pounds skinnier, then I would love myself. If I was this, if I was that. And then it becomes like this circle of like self-improvement that you'll never get out of. I think like there's this pressure. You will love yourself eventually when you conform to this idea that if you fix that, if you improve it, right? Then you will be rewarded with self-love. You'll start being more confident. And I'm not saying that like you shouldn't lose weight if you want to lose weight. I'm not saying you shouldn't learn makeup and stuff like that. But however, if you ask yourself, like, if you lost that improvement today, would you still be happy with yourself? Because I know, like, I lost weight at one point and then I gained it back and I felt even worse than I did before. And you can see many women who have like eating dis and men having eating disorders in order to keep this body, because if they don't have that body, then they don't feel secure. Like, the confidence is built off of this insecurity. I started to think about this idea of where does like this worthiness come from? Sometimes it's this effortless like comparison. I personally know I did that a lot, that I would look at people and be like, shit, like, they have all these things that I don't. I'm not achieving those things and I feel like shit because I'm not achieving those things. I want to focus on this idea that worthiness sometimes is put in this way of like easy, natural, smooth. And you look over and there are so many people that you will see achieve amazing things, and it's so easy to look at them and be like, well, that's because they're smart. That's because they're pretty. That's because they, like, you know, there's always that excuse. There's always that whatever. This idea that anything worthwhile would come with ease, would be natural, would be smooth. Sometimes, like, that loop of self-hate would also be added on from that concept. And I bring that up because I think, like, self-hate definitely comes from a lot of different places, but I think it's fueled a lot from comparison to others, and then comparison to like, oh, if I get this goalpost, I'll be happy. But then you inadvertently say like, okay, but it should be easy, when it's not. And it's like just this loop, and I just think it's really collapsible. Like, is it really self-love if you have to be liked by a certain person? If you're not eating those acorns, like, and you gain 1 pound, like, are you gonna love yourself anymore? And I don't think that's like necessarily true. When you're starting off with self-love, especially somebody coming from a negative space, sometimes you could even become too hateful towards yourself because you put so many lines of why you should be improved, and you're comparing yourself to people who have mindsets that aren't yours. The other thing is like, you're comparing, you don't know what it is. Like, you might think, oh, this person is like so nice and amazing. You tell them self-love and it's like a big easy thing for them, but it might be very complex and complicated under the hood and you don't know, right? And then I think as a whole, as a culture, I think when we talk about self-love, we make it so easy. I don't know why it's like, oh, affirmations and bubble baths, like, boom, you'll love yourself. When I believe self-love, and I can personally say that self-love is a very long and hard journey. And you're going to have to do things you're not going to like. It's not going to be ease at times. And then especially once you start working through things, you can look around everyone. They're not suffering in the way you think you're suffering, but then you don't know what's in their brain. You have to ask yourself when you're having like comparison. Is it reality? Is it performance? Your internal experience versus your external like things? Because I will also say people sometimes think like self-hate comes from this place that this person is a loser. I believe there are so many successful people out there, because I know I wasn't a loser. I've never been a loser. But there are successful people out there in whatever like field you want to think about that hate themselves but still achieve, who are rich, who are beautiful, who are smart, talented, everything under the sun, yet they still hold self-hate. And I think like one of the first things to get out of self-hate, right, is to realize that your internal monologue, your internal thought process is internal, and people don't know what you think. People cannot tell. And so especially no matter where you're starting, if you're starting like I don't want to say you're a loser, but if you're starting from a place that you have nothing going for you, right? Or starting from a place where you have everything going for you, it doesn't matter what externally is there, because internally you're having that like process. And so I think a lot of like affirmational focuses on self-love will say like, look around you. And so the person who might have a lot of things can look around and be like, well, these things don't fulfill me. The person who doesn't have a lot of things might say, well, I have nothing. And yet they both suffer from the same instance of like self-hate. I just think self-love, if we're going to get down to it, start in the internal and realize whatever you have internally, people also could have it around you wouldn't know. And then it's best to start working there. And I would say like, I love books for one reason. You get to see people's internal thought processes, and it's very different from watching a movie. So like Hunger Games, if you read the book or watch a movie, very different, because you start to see why people make decisions they do. When you watch movies, you don't know that unless they somehow write in the monologue or they write in the thinking process. And I think it's really fun sometimes to watch movies and then later on be like, let me read the book. You're like, oh my God, it's like so different. Because now you know like the internal thought processes of that person. And so let's say this is a lot of things. You're like, okay, girl, I'm just trying to recondition myself. I'm just trying to love myself. I think the first question to ask yourself is like, what is love? Is it conditional? Is it not? Because I think sometimes people will tell you like love is unconditional. I personally have a belief love is conditional. And I don't feel hurt by that concept. When you sit here and start thinking about like what love means to you, what things you accept, what things you wouldn't accept. I would say about like self-love and like stabilizing yourself is one, like understanding your identity. If you want to know about identity, baby, you gotta go a step back, and you have to go through like every episode is different. I don't know which episode will help you. I don't even know if those episodes will help you personally. If I could give like one line, you have to meet yourself where you are. You have to know who the person you're sitting in front of, and you have to pause with the self-comparison. You have to pause with the like trying to grow. You have to pause everything. And you have to be like, who are you? What do I know about you? Even the things you don't like about yourself, like why don't you like those things? Are these things thought by others? Are they like things you came up with? Do they go against how you think? Are there something that contradicts your own like thought process? Why? And I mean, that's not fun. Unfortunately, like I said, that's not going to be easy. And then a lot of that thinking is not going to have a lot of action behind it. Unfortunately, you probably will not like act out on it for a while as you're trying to build those things up. And it really helps if you separate it from people as well. I think like one thing I'll say, I think I diverged a bit with that other podcast was, I think he talked, and I cannot remember because for the life of me, I've watched that episode maybe like a month or two ago when I was writing the script. For me, I had to step back from people to learn self-love. For him, he said like lean into it. And so I think for each person, it's different. Like if you lean into other people or if you like step back. For me, it was like internally, I let a lot of my internal thought process go to everybody when I need to bring it to me and keep it to me and then figure it out and then start interacting with people. But I would say like the condition of being loved, the identity of yourself. In order to love yourself, you have to know yourself. In order to know yourself, you have to sit down with yourself. And then I would say like some people will say this line of love yourself or you can't love others. I would say like the idea probably is know yourself a little more. So when you meet others, you can learn them a little more. If you don't know yourself, it's going to be very hard for you to know others. I don't know how that reflects on love, right? But I at least know knowing. Like if you don't understand yourself, it's going to be harder to understand other people. If you're like me and this idea of like reconditioning, right? You want to recondition. You want to solve this idea of self-loathing. I think you have to ask yourself of like, where is your issue with authorship of love? Does it come from you internally? Have you been giving that up so much that you're like flip-flopping and you're just people-pleasing? Because I people-pleased a lot. So a lot of myself like understanding and conditioning came from I put it out to everybody and they made the verdict, and then I had to come back and confine myself to it. And it was a constant cycle that I didn't really check myself and be like, cool. So for me, I had to step back. External affirmations did not help me. There are people out there who maybe they are so into themselves that they generally think they're a horrible person. And if they went out and talked to people, they would realize they're not. So it really depends on what type of person you are, I would argue. But I think like to solve self-loathing off the bat is not to hate it. You have to face it. No matter if it's internally, you facing it and realizing things about yourself and saying, hey, people might not like this trait about me, but I love this trait about me. Or, you know, taking some traits and putting it out there and realizing people don't care. People actually don't care. And I think like at the core, even if you have to like put yourself out there, it also helps realizing when that stuff matters or not. Like you put yourself out there and there are people who are like dogging on you and hate you and all these things, right? You can also start to realize, well, I realize being in these spaces make me feel bad. I should pull back and find another space. Okay, so we're gonna kind of move on to another question that I was thinking about when just sitting and pondering self-love was what actually changes the self-relationship. And for me, I focused on self-love internally. And I personally sat down and started to realize I put a lot of energy into figuring other people out. And then I didn't put a lot of energy in figuring out what I like. I spent a very long time like sitting and conditioning myself to realize things like, okay, you know what? When you're irritated, it means this. When you're sitting and your shoulders are a certain way, or your like body language is different, that means something for you. And that sounds so simple, but for me it wasn't. And I think it is very different for every person of what they start to notice and why and when. And then sometimes I would say like lean into the embarrassment. Podcast is very embarrassing for me a lot. If people come to me and talk about it to me in real life, I am always like, oh my God, please no. I love y'all. I love y'all. If you're listening, I love you so much. I think I just get caught off guard. I'm like, oh my God, please, please. You know my internal thought process a little bit. Realizing stuff like that. And then shame is like a huge thing. I could write an entire episode on shame. But catching shame in real time, catching like pauses in real time. Because like sometimes pauses for me were like shame. And I was like, cool, like I paused. It's because I feel shameful. Why am I feeling shameful? And then like playing that through, just really calling yourself out in like a very simple way. I don't know how everyone self-hates. I think people self-hate in different ways. I think for me, I'm just an analytical person. And so I still critique things I do. I still think about things I do. In fact, I think as much as I did in the past. I just don't feel like I have to prove whether my thought process is right to myself. Like if I'm gonna be on a diet and I eat a donut, like I'm not going to make this like a whole moral judgment and saying like, see, you can't handle a diet. I just kind of critique and be like, okay, is that gonna add to your diet? No. Okay. Now you have to calculate your calories. Okay, let's do it then. Tomorrow now I have to have a smaller cut. Like whatever it is, I just sit there and walk through it. And then by the end of it, I'm like, whoa, that self-critical part of me is not actually bad. And I actually enjoy the part of me that is critical, whether it's self-critical or critical to the world around me. I enjoy that part of me. I realize that's part of me. I don't look at it in a shameful, evil way. And I just bring that up because I think if you live in self-loathing, like sometimes you think that is bad, that you think too hard. You think it's bad because you think about certain things. And sometimes if you just sit with like everything and be like, okay, this is all me, good and bad, then you start to realize some like characteristics you didn't like are kind of chill. Or in my case, I love them. You might be a person who's sitting here and like, okay, that's kind of hard to think about. So I'm going to put this in some questions in some ways that might help you as a self-loather, like think a little hard about it. But like essentially, first off, what if you stop doing all that effort of looking for evidence of being wrong, being shameful, being a reason to hate? Because sometimes you look for confirmation of this idea you already have. You don't look at yourself in a space that is very positive. And I would say like go on a piece of paper, write all the things you do in your life. Things that you would say other people compliment you on, things that you are proud of. And if you're going to sit here and say like, I literally have nothing. I literally am a horrible person. Okay, fine. Write all the things that you're horrible about on a piece of paper. Give yourself 2-3 weeks, and I want you to come back to that paper and read it like it's somebody else. For me, I think like that type of practice is very helpful. That you look at things, you're like, wait, I'm actually a lot different than what I see myself as. If you think about characters in books, movies versus books, you see so many thought decisions of a character. A book will show you that. A movie won't. So there's so many movie characters, the way they're like shown, I'm like, wow, when I read you, I saw you in a completely different way. And it's very interesting now to see you acted out like you're a completely different person. And so if you look at yourself on paper, like that's how people might be viewing you if you wrote the positive things. Now, if you wrote all the negative things, right? I want you to think about how many of those things are on that list. Like how many of these things on this list would somebody figure out about you in an hour? And then even on the good list, you could do that too if you're like such a self-critical person. Here's the thing, no one's going to know you that well enough to all the insecurities you just wrote. And even all the accomplishments you wrote, if you're a self-critical and self-loathing person, I know you held back. I know you did. And so those lists might be the tip of the iceberg of how people view you. That evidence matters a lot more than your mood and your feelings towards yourself, because most people don't see you as your internal thought process. They see you as the actions that come out. What if those things became a motivation for you instead of like a verdict of you being horrible? What if you seeing on this piece of paper right now, like, oh crap, wait, like how many of these things are things that generally I could work on if I think like I'm really horrible at social cues? Well, people couldn't find out within the hour of knowing that about me. If I wanted to work on it, and then asking yourself, like, how do you start fortifying this list that you have of good things? By just acting out more in that way and not worrying too hard about the bad things. Look, I'll be honest to you. I'm not telling you you're going to love every single part of yourself and you're not going to have parts of you that you don't like. What I'm saying instead is those parts are not going to be shameful enough for you at a point, because you're either working on it or you understand that this is just a fault you might have if you go through the identity route. If you didn't go the identity route and you want to do like this small action-based, like people-based concept, you have in front of you examples. And if you think like every single person is telling you the same recurring thing, find your space. Honestly, truly, I'm not even trying to get on you, but I feel like a lot of people can find someone who will like the way they think. You see so many different groups of people coming together over things that another group would think is so cringy, so lame, so bad, right? You will see furries come together and love being furries. You will see on the opposite end, like basic Starbucks, I don't even know what basic white girls do, but basic white girls come together and do Pilates, right? And some people on the other end will be like, oh my god, Pilates so lame. You might see furries do Pilates. Like, it's whatever. It's kind of getting out of this state of emotional viewing of yourself and being very straight up. I think for me, when I started just looking at myself in that way for a second and stopped putting the emotion behind it, it started being a little bit easier to be like, wait, maybe I don't hate myself. And then eventually love myself. And let's say like the word love is too much for you. Let's talk about self-respect. Self-respect, I think, is the prettier version of self-love. I think if you view love as conditional as I do, this idea of love is really hard for you, because I know some people had horrible opportunities of love, whether that is familial love, whether that is like friend love or love. They just had a horrible time. They just were told in so many ways that their condition of being was not lovable, that they were unlovable. And if you're unlovable, that means you're hated, if you follow that thread line. Because if multiple people say you're unlovable, then you must be hated, because now it's a consensus. I would say self-respect is a bit easier because to me it's a little more actionable. You can't make people love you. You really can't make people respect you. But there are clear characteristics when it comes to respect. It's consistency. You can hate somebody but still respect them because you know exactly what they are. You know exactly how they move. Sometimes I would say self-respect stabilizes what self-love can't. It stops you from being in this emotional state of looking at yourself saying like our exercise that we just did of like, oh, I'm a horrible person. And then self-respect is like, okay, cool, I have this list. These are the things I need to work on. These are the things I don't. It takes the emotion out of it. And I think like one of the first things is, if you take the emotional chargedness, if the moral guilt, the morality of you being horrible or a bad person, it kind of becomes easier to, on paper, like actually improve, because you're not like really feeling like if you want to lose that 10 pounds and somehow you're not doing it right, it's not a moral failure. It's just analytical, okay, self-respect, what am I doing wrong? You don't hate yourself. You're not trying to force yourself and love your way and like, oh, it's okay that you didn't follow your diet. You're not doing that. You're more like, okay, girl, you didn't respect the diet. You didn't do what you said. What is this diet missing for you not to follow it? And it stops being shame. It's not like you're coming up with all these excuses of why. You're just like, whatever it is, it's just not, like the food is not good. That's my answer. Like if my answer was like the food is not good. Okay, what are you eating? Carrots and cottage cheese. Do you like cottage cheese? No. Okay, then stop eating cottage cheese. There's no emotion to that. There's no like emotional background. I know, that's crazy. Wow. But it requires trust. It requires respect to see yourself as a adult and say like, you know what? I don't need to hold my own hand and say, it's okay that you ate all those cookies, da-da. It's like, you did that. Okay. You ate the cookies. Why did you eat the cookies? Because they were in your house. Okay, stop bringing cookies in your house. Like, it just, I don't know, it just, for me, it's just so nice because, like, it takes all of this immorality, this emotional state of self-love, because I think love is emotional, and it just, like, disappears, and it's just very straightforward for me. And that's personally what I love. And even if you decide to do, like, the route of, like, being around people and learning about yourself, or you decide to do the more interpersonal route of, like, self-understanding and knowing yourself, either way, you start to know yourself more and more and more. And with self-love, I think one of the biggest things, that authorship thing again, no matter what you do, it's coming back to yourself with understanding of yourself and just coming and having dialogue. I'm a person who will have dialogue with myself in that type of way to hold myself to the standards that I want to be. But I had to learn how to take the emotion out of it, like the way I gave examples of, in order to trust myself. But if you don't trust yourself, are you ever gonna feel good? It's like dating somebody you don't trust. Dating somebody you don't trust, you're always looking over your shoulder. You're never, like, fully happy. So I just want to talk about a few other, like, concepts about self-love and then try to wrap it up, because I think it is a lot and I feel like I am yapping, but I love this. If you were to focus on self-love a little harder, outcomes, like examples and reasons why you should be loved, that comes from the idea of conditional love, in my opinion. It's this idea of, as long as you achieve the thing at the end, whatever happened in between doesn't matter. But I don't think that's true. And it really takes away this concept, somehow worthiness and worth being natural. It's being smooth and all those things. It's easy and all of that. I think, like, it's so seductive almost to look at love in a place of, like, examples and outcomes, because you forget everything in between. You forget the struggle. You forget, like, the times you mess up. And because you, like, love the outcome, I think you become a little more obsessed and a little more shameful and morally, like, crazy to yourself, because that diet, you're never gonna lose those 10 pounds because you keep eating. Instead of being like, how can I adjust? How can I adjust? Because the outcome is all about the 10 pounds and that timeline more than how can I get there. You are never going to last focusing on love and outcomes, because things fall apart. You slip up, and when you slip up, how are you going to react? Not nice. So thinking is private, but actions are not. And you as a human being will be interpreted. And when you have self-hate, what you might take on what other people say about you as to be truth. Even if I write on paper right now, like personally being in self-love, if I wrote on paper right now all the things I love about myself, I know like half of those things other people might not even know or understand. People will project. People only know part of your story, and that's okay. If you stabilize yourself, it becomes a little bit easier to choose in spite of. To continue in spite of. You don't need someone to tell you what's the right answer. You don't need to continue and be reassured. Even though it would be lovely to be reassured. Oh my God, it would be so lovely. But to be authored, to be anchored, to be the person that writes your own story and not be mad and angry at the world, or not like start turning to them for answers, is really, really hard. Once you start having self-respect, it's like you start knowing better. You start knowing even if the easier answer's in front of you, that might not be the right answer. And I think it really like boils down to also keep remembering that like worth and worthiness are not necessarily natural, easy, and smooth. And yeah, like there's no easy answer of like boom and then one day it will be natural. Maybe there is, but baby, I've not hit that point yet. And when I do, I'll let y'all know. But I've not hit that point. Self-love came after I started respecting myself, not shaming myself about actions I chose, but re-understanding why those actions happen. Of now having to deal with external opinions, it becomes a lot easier when you have the self-respect to go through those questionings and then be like, cool. Okay, that's what I need to do. Then you'll become a little more pickier when it comes to everything around you. And I think like self-love and self-respect happen together. After you respect yourself for a while, love will come in. And so I know a lot of people say that like line of love yourself and you can love others. But I would say like respect yourself and you can meet others where they are. Like, that's not fun to say, but when you respect yourself, it's not like you're going to be able to fall in love and all those things, but it's you get to choose things that are meant for you better, because someone can come to you and tell you things about yourself and tell you how much they validate and love and support you, but then you start being able to have the same analytical self that you have to yourself to them, and you start being able to be like, is this person truthful? Yes, they are. I love them. If they're not being truthful, oh, let me think about these things. And I think like it also for me is a great stabilizer, because if I do it to myself, baby, I could do it to anybody. Don't matter. I'm lying. I'm still working on that. I'm still working not real hard to do it to other people, but I'm trying. And so yeah, there's no like ending real fix or like, boom, we did it, Joe. We have the answer to how to self-love. But I will say, if you hate yourself, if you're in self-loathing, starting with this idea of most of the advice online is probably not going to help you. There are multitudes of ways, but you have to acknowledge from the very beginning that you hate yourself. You hate parts of yourself. Saying that to yourself, figuring out those things, gives it less power. When you like hide everything under the shame carpet, like baby, it's still there. We all see the elephant under the carpet. And yeah, when you become visible, you're kind of misunderstood. Like, it's hard and it's not easy, but like I definitely think the long-term efforts are worth it. I will say the long-term benefits have been great. I haven't seen all of them, and I probably will see them as I continue to build, but I think this is a great foundation to start, and this is probably the first place after sitting and thinking really hard about a lot of things. And if you think about anything, you should think about like your self-concept. This is the first place that you start to validate, because now you have to stand in front of others and people give you feedback. You're in places and it's not anymore of like this abrasive, like, don't talk to me, don't even acknowledge, I'm still building. It's like, no, like people could start to see the shape of the building, you know? You put the foundations down, people are seeing that you're building whatever skyscraper you're building. And you can't just acknowledge, you know, the pictures that you drew of how the skyscraper is going to look. Like, now people are going to see that little foundation being put down. They're going to want to know, what's that building? Is it a Dave's Hot Chicken? What is it? Like, people want to know. And you're going to have to learn how to deal with that. And let me tell you something. If you built that blueprint, baby, if you love that blueprint, you're not going to be scared to tell them what it is. Now, if you didn't, they're going to start telling you how to build your business. They're going to tell you, oh, you should have it this many stories. And then you're screwed, because guess what? When you start building now, you're going to hand over plans to other people. You're going to have people coming to your building and critiquing it before you're even finished with it. Hell no. Baby, love yourself. Hell no. We're not doing that. You going to love the building you made, right? Because you respected the plan. You respected the plan that you're doing. I think so. All right. Thank you guys so much. This is really fun. And can't wait to see what next topic we're going to like play with a lot. And I'll see y'all next time.